Thank you for tuning in to Grieving Voices. Today, my guest is Phil Cohen. He is a keynote TEDx speaker, grief coach, and creator of the Grief Continuum, a framework for helping others grow, flourish, and overcome despair by discovering and developing their inner resilience. For over 25 years, Phil has helped global technology startups grow and prosper through developing their sales teams. After experiencing the sudden loss of his son, Phil has found a renewed purpose in helping others to integrate grief into their own lives after experiencing the inevitable traumas, tragedies, and transitions in life. Thank you so much for being my guest, Phil.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for having me, Victoria. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start with, you call yourself, is your business the Grief Guy? Is that accurate?
Yes, that's, either just Phil Cohen or the Grief Guy. And, the reason why I did that is that I found that the vast majority of people that I'm working with are men. And it's been my experience through everything that I've gone through that men have no idea, or they're really not educated on how to grieve properly. So they'll push it down, they'll run away from it. And especially those men who have lost a child, as a society, we have a tendency to flock around the mothers, which I totally get. And dad just wants to be strong for his wife and his family, and he really doesn't get a chance to be heard. So I just named my business the Grief Guy, really just in an effort maybe to attract more men.
Do you find that a lot of the work that you're doing with these men, do you dig into their childhood experiences with grief and trauma too? Does a lot of that come up, or is it mostly just current grief experiences that they're having that they find their way?
It always starts, sorry to interrupt you.
No?
Yeah, it always starts with the current experience. That's where the jump off point is, and eventually inevitably gets into other parts of their life. So it's kind of like, it starts out a grief coach and then maybe more of like a life and business coach at the same time. I found that a lot of men, or even some of the women that I work with, they want to do something with what they've learned and what they've been through. So whether it's be, I get a lot of questions about, how did you get your TEDx talk? What did you do? What processes did you go through? I'm in the process of writing a book, and people ask me, well, how can I do that? Do I have to self-publish? How do I start? So it's not only working through the emotional aspect, it's also helping them do something with what they've learned through their grief.
And when did this all started because of your own loss and your experience? And so can take us back into time and share what your loss has been and the impact it's had.
Sure. So on July 24th, 2015, and if you were anywhere on the East Coast, especially Florida, you likely remember the story. My son and his close friend were last seen leaving the Jupiter Inlet on a 19-foot fishing boat. There was a really bad storm, one of those storms, that South Florida storms that come out of nowhere. There was 40-mile-an-hour winds, heavy rains. We tried to reach the boys via their cell phones, and after unsuccessful attempts at that, the Coast Guard was notified. And I haven't confirmed this, but I was told that it was the most extensive search in the history of the United States Coast Guard. It lasted 7 excruciating days. I live in California now, in San Diego, so on the other coast, and people go missing all the time. Paddle boarders, people on sailboats, and generally they'll look for a week. Like a day, maybe a half a day, but to be continuing looking for a week and all the assets that were used, it was a really long search. Unfortunately, neither of the boys were ever found. And although I've been through all of the reports, there was the Coast Guard report, the FWCC report, that's Florida Wildlife, FBI was involved, and we hired private searches as well. I don't know for sure exactly what happened, but I'm pretty sure they got caught in a storm. I know that their motor seized and likely flipped over in that storm. And I'd like to think that they perished quickly, but we don't know for sure.
Was the boat ever found?
The boat was lost and found 3 times. believe it or not. So on the boys went missing on a Friday. On Sunday, they found the boat off the coast of Ponce de Leon, Florida. So many, many miles north. It got into the jet stream and started to head north. And what the Coast Guard will do is they'll basically reverse engineer the currents to determine where the boat, where the boat started from. So what they said that they did was that they threw in a marker buoy because they found it with a helicopter and they couldn't obviously, I'm sorry, it was initially one of their planes. So they dropped a marker buoy that would basically stay with the boat. But unfortunately, somehow it didn't. Then several months later, a water taxi spotted the boat and they went back to go get the right equipment to pull the boat in. And then when they went back for it, they couldn't find it. And then about a year and a half later, there was a Norwegian shipping container that eventually found the boat and pulled it up onto its I forgot what you call the platform of that boat, but we eventually did find the boat. And believe it or not, one of the crazy things about that was my son's friend's cell phone, his iPhone, was found in a watertight compartment inside the boat. We sent the phone to Apple to get some data off the phone, any possible data, because I really thought, okay, now I'm going to be able to fill in some of the missing pieces of exactly where they were, maybe some of the text or phone calls that were made, but Apple was never able to retrieve any information off the phone. So, there's still a lot of missing pieces to it, but the boat was eventually found.
Was it in good condition? Like it was still good condition or just pretty?
No, it was very deteriorated. I mean, the phone was actually in decent condition, but the boat there was just mainly just a hull. The center console had basically dropped off, and a lot of the other pieces had basically dropped off. There are photos of it if you Google, Perry Cohen, who's my son. You'll see that pictures of the boat and the vessel that attempted to pick it up or did pick it up. But it was crazy. The captain of that boat said that he was on there with his wife, and his wife said, "Let's go out and get some fresh air." And he said, if he didn't go out at that exact moment and look in the direction of exactly where he looked, he would have never spotted the boat because it had a black hull. So it was almost like, the boat wanted to be found.
Wow. So what was life like in the weeks following and after and months? What was that like?
People ask me that question quite a bit, and it's like almost impossible to put into words what that feeling is like. Perry was my only child. So, and prior to that, I'd always considered myself blessed because and I still do consider myself blessed, but I'd never lost anybody that I loved. So to all of a sudden lose the most precious person in my life was a real blow to me. I didn't know what to do. I'd say in terms of a feeling, it felt like somebody just scooped out the entire middle of my body. Like there was nothing in the center part of my body, but it still hurt a lot. And, there's no preparation or training or, for something like this. So I had no idea what I was supposed to do. So I just broke down. Really, I broke down and I stayed hidden for quite some time, just in a dark room on the floor, crying, trying to figure out, asking why me. I definitely had my wrestling with God moment for sure. Especially as a Christian going into this, I remember thinking, God, the words that you used, and he could have said anything to tell the world how much he loves us. But the words he chose to use was, I love the world so much that I gave my only begotten son. And yet you took mine. And so it was definitely shook my faith for a little bit. But I'm so thankful for the foundation of faith that I had in place going into this. Because otherwise, I really don't know where I would be.
What did healing look like for you?
Healing. Well, like I said, when in our pre-interview, I didn't know really what I was supposed to do. Really, I didn't know. Do I see a therapist? What kind of therapist? How do I find a good therapist? Um, so I actually Googled how to grieve because I knew that doing nothing wasn't going to be the right thing, and I really wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. And if you Google anything around grief, you're going to find the 5 stages of grief. And for me, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, when I saw that, it felt like I was doing something wrong because I hadn't experienced grief in those stages or in those ways. Um, so the ultimate healing came from me is from a couple of things. One, talking to people. I did go see a therapist, and that was very helpful, both talk therapy and EMDR therapy. But the biggest moment for me was in one of those moments when I found myself on the floor, curled up in a ball. I saw my son, and maybe people ask me, "Did you really see him?" I'm not sure. Maybe it's been so many years, but I definitely heard him. And he said, "Get up, Dad. It's okay. I'll see you when you get here." But the way that he said, "Get up, Dad," was like enough already. Like you cried, you've gone through this, you've been doing this for a year and a half. Get up, live your life with passion, like you always told me to do, and I'll see you when you get here. And that at that moment was a transitional point for me because I was always focused on myself. I was focused on my own pain, my own shame and worthlessness and guilt. And it was the moment when I stopped asking myself, why me, to, what can I do about this now, that things really began to shift for me. And hearing those words let me know that my son didn't want to see me in that state. That's not the way he'd want me to live my life. So when I talk to people about this, they'll say, well, it's like he gave you permission. But I feel like, I gave myself permission. He just told me like just enough already. And when I finally gave myself permission to let go of the worthlessness and the shame and the guilt, I started taking Post-it notes and I'd place them, in my car and my bathroom mirror, my refrigerator, and I'd write things like, I'd give myself permission to heal. And from that moment on, it was a real shift for me because I stopped thinking about myself and started thinking about, okay, well, what can I do about this now?
Growing up, you said that the loss of your son was the first loss that you experienced. So growing up, you didn't have any losses and grief wasn't really a topic of conversation in your home?
Yeah, no. So both my mom's parents were gone before I was born. My father's mother was gone before I was born. I did lose my grandfather, but we weren't very close. So, although that was probably my first experience with a direct family member, um, it wasn't the extreme amounts of pain that you feel from somebody that you spend every day with or you see often, or a brother or a sister. So it's not that we avoided the discussion. It nothing traumatic like that ever happened.
I'm curious if you ever thought, because in grief isn't just about death of a loved one. It can be the loss of a dream, or it really is too the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations, and anything that we wish would have been different and better or more. That can be
Yeah.
for relationships with those living, and it can be with your career or all sorts of things. Did you ever consider or think about like the loss of not having grandparents really in your life? You said your grandpa was in your life, but you weren't real close. So, I mean, I could just think back to my childhood. There's a picture of me in my classroom, and it was like grandparents' day, and I'm turning around, and on either seat next to me, my classmates both had their grandparent with them. I was the only kid that didn't have a grandparent with them. So, was that something that you recognized as a child, that you didn't have your grandparents in your life?
That's a great question. Yes, yes, there definitely were times where I did recognize that. I just and don't get me wrong. I mean, I guess when you put it like that, I definitely had experienced a lot of grief prior to losing my son. I mean, I've lost relationships and other things that I loved, jobs, hopes and dreams, things like that. But none of that. I guess I've always been fairly resilient. Growing up, I just say, okay, I'd feel the pain and then immediately ask, okay, what's next? What can I do about it? Because if there's nothing that can be done with the loss of a job or the loss of a dream or something like that, then I don't. I chose really not to ruminate in it because a lot of these things, like these other decisions, I feel like they do come down to a choice. Yes, we do. We do need to grieve those things and feel the pain, but eventually, it's a choice whether we want to live there or not. So with everything else prior to losing my son, I felt like I was able to move on fairly quickly. But with my son, that took me for a, a big loop for sure. Um, I'm not sure if I completely answered your question, but I can't recall ever feeling sad that I didn't have, grandparents, because I always had a lot of friends and a lot of family. So I maybe not knowing what I wasn't missing potentially was part of that.
In the work that you do with men particularly, how do you help them discern then if how they're approaching their grief is resiliency, or if it's a tendency for not just men but many of us to be like go into the Mr. Fix It role, like I'm gonna fix this and I'm going to, you know what I'm getting at?
Yes, and I mean I think that's definitely what as men we do. We go into what can we do to fix it, and I feel like, yeah, as you said, it's not just men that do that. Um, the biggest thing is, have they taken the time, number one, to truly feel the pain? Because that's one of the biggest things that I feel that most men don't take the time to do. It's kind of like holding a beach ball underwater, right? Like you could do it and you could do it for a while, but eventually it's going to find its way out to the surface. And sometimes the harder we push it down and the further we push it down, the faster and harder it comes up. You're not going to avoid it. You're not going to escape it, and you can't insulate yourself from it. It's going to have to be addressed at some point. So, but most people have a tendency to run from it, and there's kind of a great metaphor for this. One of my friends was telling me about where he lives, in Colorado near the Rocky Mountains. And I don't know if you know this, but Colorado is one of the only places where both buffaloes and cows can coexist. And we all have storms, right? Their storms are going to come, but the choice that we have is, what are we going to do about them? How do we respond to those storms? So, and what these two creatures do with the storms is quite interesting. Cows, generally the storms will come from the west and head towards the east. And cows will, when they sense the storm, they will start running east, away from the storm. And if you know anything about cows, you know that they're not very fast. So they wind up running with the storm, ultimately maximizing their time and the pain and the frustration that they have in that storm. And I feel like as humans, we often do the same thing, right? We run away from these things, the trials, tragedies, and transitions, as opposed to facing them. But what buffaloes do is quite unique to the animal kingdom. When buffaloes sense the storm coming from the west, they hide behind a ridge. And when it rolls over the crest of the mountaintop, they turn and run through the storm. They run at the storm, ultimately minimizing their pain and time and frustration in the storm. And I think it's just a great metaphor, because although we all have storms in our life, it's just a matter of what we choose to do when we're faced with them. And I'm not saying that when a storm comes, especially like losing a child, you turn and face it and just run through it. You have to feel that pain. But at some point, you have to make a decision if you want to stay there.
How in that year, you said it was about a year and a half where it was just really difficult and challenging after your son passed. How was grief manifesting in your life during that time?
It was a lot of feelings of worthlessness, a lot of feelings of guilt, things I wish I could have done differently. Feeling like I wasn't able to even protect my only son. So, what good am I? Just tremendous amounts of tears. And because of the fact that everything played out on national news and social media while this search went on, I didn't really even want to go outside. I wanted to stay inside because I would remember, I know, and I recall several times where people were like pointing and looking at me and saying, "Oh, that's the guy who lost his son at sea." And I remember thinking like, well, what's a man who lost his son at sea supposed to look like? Like, what am I supposed to walk around with my head down crying? I didn't know what to do. I really didn't. I was completely and utterly lost, having no idea what my next steps should be.
I can't imagine. When we typically have a loss, we don't have it in the public eye, right? And so I can't imagine what that would have felt like to feel like your grief is under scrutiny, really.
Yeah.
You probably felt like, from what you've described, like you didn't know, am I doing this wrong? Should I be doing this a different way? Like it would be very confusing and overwhelming, I'm sure.
It was. And, even after, hearing those words from my son, I remember thinking, okay, maybe a couple of years, 2.5 years later, I didn't want to post anything on social media. I remarried about 3 years ago, and my wife and I took a trip to Italy, and we were enjoying ourselves, but I didn't even want to post a picture of myself with any type of smile or showing that I was doing something out of fear of people thinking like, how could he be having fun? Like, how could he be out living his life, after losing his only child, and just the fear of what other people might think. But, my belief is that we don't have to stay there. That is a choice. That is a choice. And I believe that I know with absolute confidence and conviction that my son would not want me to be in that situation. And I believe that most of the people who've lost somebody, the one that they lost, would also probably tell them to get up too. So at some point, like I said, it really does become a choice. And then, how do we then take that first step and then the next and then the next to be able to try to come back to some semblance of a normal life?
So what did that look like for you, processing the guilt and the shame and the feeling of scrutiny? Like, what did that look like?
What did it look like? A lot of it was internal. A lot of it was my own thoughts and then asking myself, is that true? There was nothing that anybody could have done in that moment, other than maybe had locked my son up in a room, which obviously nobody's going to do. But so really, the first step for me was a decision to decide. I said, okay, I don't want to live my life like this, because if I do, this is not a life worth living, to be just constantly ruminating and thinking about all the things that I could have done differently, or ways that maybe I could have stopped it, or how maybe some other people made mistakes and things like that. So that was getting me nowhere. So my first step was, okay, I want to pursue a life of healing, and then to find some way to help other people. And then, I cultivated a community. I found people that would support me and to be there with me and to help me. And you can't go through something like this alone. You can't do it alone. You need somebody there to help you and to pick you up, and not to fix it, just to be there and to listen and to let you cry and to just sit there with you. Um, I did find EMDR therapy helpful, but it didn't remove all of the pain. Wasn't able to remove, and I don't think the pain will ever fully go away. And part of, like, in my TED talk, I talk about, yes, I did finally reach a point of acceptance and even found some gifts beyond acceptance. But even like last night or the night before, my wife and I were watching a movie. I don't remember the name. It's with Mark Wahlberg, where his son commits suicide, and he decides to walk across the country to, talk about bullying. And eventually, I think he gets hit by a truck and he dies. And just going through that, watching the movie, I was in tears. I was in tears because it makes me sad to kind of go back to some of those moments of losing my son. But all that's okay. It doesn't mean that I'm not healing properly or I'm not grieving properly. I think grief is something that, we move back and forth through. It's not, specific actual steps that we go through, even though there are similar stages, I think, that we all experience, but there isn't one route. And I don't think that there is a place of acceptance and then we're done. We're constantly moving back and forth through this forever.
Yeah, it's an ebb and flow. And I think as we grow and evolve, as does our grief. And in the follow-up takeaways and reflections episode, I'll dig more into that 5 stages and talk a little bit about that. And so we won't cover that here, but we did briefly talk about ahead of time, though, that it wasn't a linear process, and there's many more stages, in quotations, than just the 5. It's society really has, and pop culture has really driven home the idea of the 5 stages, but really it wasn't the intention of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work. And yeah, anyway, that's for another episode. But I want to ask, if your son was in front of you, you had one day with him, he was just in front of you, what would you want to say to him?
I like to journal, and I would let these free flowing thoughts come up as they did, nothing in a particular order or that it would make sense. And one time I found myself writing a letter to Perry. And I go back and I visit it often, and I'm not sure that it will ever be done. So I've kind of had this conversation in my mind. The first thing I would want to say is I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to save him as his father. That to me, that was the most amount of pain is, if the boys were lost in a field or somewhere on land, I know I'd be able to go to where they were and walk a grid pattern until I found them. But in the Atlantic Ocean, it was nearly impossible to know where to start. But still, I know that he must have been thinking or wishing that I was there to be able to save him. And so, I would tell him that I'm sorry that I wasn't able to save him. I told Perry that I loved him so often, to the point where I would say, guess what, Per? And he'd say, yeah, Dad, I know you love me, So, but I would still tell him how much I love him and how much I wish that I would be able to experience all of the things that a parent should be able to experience with their child. His first girlfriend, his first love, getting married, going to school, first job, and just being there as a dad to be able to give him the advice that I know that I did get, or I would have wish I would have gotten, at his age and years past. How much I miss him. I miss him so much. There's Perry's natural state was one of laughter. He's such a happy kid. Um, and I miss hearing that laugh. His laugh was infectious. And when he gave you a hug, it wasn't like a weak hug. It was a strong, firm hug. And I miss feeling his arms wrapped around me. I guess, things like that.
Making me cry.
Right.
I'm a mom, I'm a parent, and I have teenagers. And so my heart just goes out to you, because I know that pain probably will never go away. That sadness of
No.
not, that empty seat's always there. And those milestones are never to be enjoyed. So thank you for sharing about Perry in that way. Have you been back to Florida?
I have several times. I've been to the Jupiter Inlet. The other, my son's close friend's family, they put up a monument, a statue out there of mom and dad are kind of like, I believe they say it's not supposed to be them, but it looks like them, of them kind of going like this with their hands above their eyes, kind of searching out into the sea. There's no plaque or anything like that. It's just a memorial to them, and when I stand there, I really feel it, because that's the last place that they were seen. There's video, some cameras there, boats going in and out of the Jupiter Inlet. So that was, the last time they were actually seen alive. And my parents live there, and they live on the ocean. So I go out there and I talk to Perry every day in the shower, in my car. And I remember in the first couple of weeks, my brothers, I have two older brothers, and I'm the youngest of three. They were there with me the whole time. And my oldest brother, he's definitely a bit of an adrenaline junkie, but, a super positive kind of person. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, let's go in the ocean. And this was like maybe 10 days, a couple of weeks after the boys went missing. And I remember like almost getting angry at him. Like, how could you? No, like, no, I don't want to. And I remember saying to him, I know what you're trying to do, like almost got mad at him for doing that. And I heard in my head also, like, go ahead, Dad, like, I don't know, there's something about, I've always been this way. Like there's a quote, I'm not sure who said it, but it goes, if you can't, then you must. So if anytime something ever comes up that brings up any level of fear for me, I do it, because on the other side of fear is always something powerful. There's always some kind of gift on the other side of fear. So I went in the ocean, and I broke down. I mean, I broke down big time. But there's healing that comes from that. There's healing that comes from facing your storms, and when I do, because my parents are there, I go there and I sit on the beach and I talk to Perry, even though I know he's not there. But since I have an idea of where they went missing, you kind of feel like they're there with you, like he's there with me. So yeah, I go back often, and I don't let anything like that get in my way, like things that I won't do. I don't let anything, I don't do or not do anything out of fear. I won't let something, if it scares me, I feel like it's something I need to approach, and like giving my TED talk, and working with other people and sharing my story right now. This is probably like the fourth podcast I've ever been on. I'm still working my way through it, but I'm here because I want people to hear my story. I want people to know that regardless of what they went through, that they can heal, that healing is attainable. And there are things you can do. But the first thing you have to do is choose, because I would say that over the past 6.5 years, I've had tons of conversations with people who've lost children, and maybe not someone who's just lost a children, maybe someone who's lost a wife or a husband or somebody that's really close to them, or somebody will connect me with them. And I'd say about 10% of the people I speak to will say something like, Phil, I don't care what you have to say. I lost the most precious person in my life. So there's nothing you could tell me, show me, talk to me about. My life is over, and I don't really even want to be here right now. So if that's the stance that you choose, then you'll likely never heal until you decide that healing is something that you want to pursue. So, I made that decision about 1.5 years into it. I wish I would have made it earlier. But, I remember, I think it's, I don't remember her name. It's on the tip of my tongue. There was a young lady through COVID. Her husband lost his leg. He was a theater actor, and she was posting, pretty girl, blonde hair. I can't believe I forgot her name. But she went on The View or one of these talk shows, and she got scorned because she was smiling and she was laughing and she was having a good time. That people were saying, it's only been a few months. How could you be out there laughing and having a good time? And I think that there's like this negative taboo thing that, like, if something bad happens to you, that you have to lock yourself up in a room for years, and that's false. That's
And then
false.
you get criticized for that.
Yeah, what you mean, for locking yourself up, right?
Yeah.
You get. It's true. I've lost friends and family members because of this. People that have said, Phil, it's just too sad for me to be around you. Which is like, I kind of like a double whammy, right? Like, it's too sad for them, to be around me.
Losses are very common. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've talked what you've shared. You probably answered the question already, but I was going to ask you, what has your grief taught you? And you've kind of shared a lot there, but is there anything specific that you would like to say to that about what your grief taught you?
Yeah. It's taught me a lot, actually. I think that you really, when you go through something like this, you really figure out who you are when you ask yourself, when you stop asking, why me? And you start asking, okay, what can I do about it now? And I realized that I'm a lot stronger than I thought I was. And I also, that there's nothing at this point in my life that can happen to me that was worse than what already happened. So no, like, I can take on anything. I've made it through the worst, what many medical professionals would consider the worst possible thing that can happen to a human being, is losing a child. And I don't want to say made it through, but I'm not living a life of despair. And now, God's got me on a path to help other people get through that healing. And I just there's nothing more satisfying. So I've owned a couple of businesses. I've been fairly successful on a professional level, and the money and the success is so much lower on the totem pole compared to somebody coming up to you and saying, thank you. Thank you for spending the time with me. Thank you for that thing that you said or that thing that you shared, because it's helped me heal. Like, to me, that is the highest level of appreciation, and the highest level of a gift for me, is to know that, I guess it's, taking this thing and making some sort of good out of it.
In the work that you do with men now, can you talk a little bit about the grief continuum and what that looks like?
Sure. So, it does touch kind of, a little bit, on the 5 stages part of it, but, it's when I had no idea what I was supposed to do, I actually Googled how to grieve. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And, I saw the 5 stages and I felt like, I think I must be doing something wrong because I didn't experience grief like that. So, you may start at denial or anger or bargaining or depression, but you also may be somewhere in guilt or worthlessness or revenge. And going through this process, on the other side of acceptance. So everything, if you think about the continuum with all the negative things being on the left, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, worthlessness, guilt, shame, all of those things are all about you. It's you focused on you. And it's only when you start thinking about other people and how you can help other people, or even those being your family and those other people who are around you, that things start to shift a little bit. So it's mostly, also getting guys to take the time to feel the pain, especially like men who have lost children. And, I don't know if we talked about this earlier or during our time live, but when men lose a child, generally as a society, we flock around the mothers, which I totally understand and I totally get, and there's not a lot of attention. If you go to, I've been to several, if you go to a few, not that you want to, but if you happen to find yourself at a funeral for a child, you will see this played out over and over and over again, how everybody will be flocking around mom and dad's kind of off to the side. And it's been my experience that the last person men want to share their pain and their grief with is their wife. They want to be there to support them. They want to be their rock. They want to be, their support system. So a lot of times they don't get to let it all out and to face the vulnerability, that it takes to make it through feeling that pain. So I work with them on helping them to access that, because you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. And I know, even, from with my new wife, over the years, she, every time Perry's birthday, it would be Perry's birthday or his death day, or the day that he went missing, I know she would ask me questions like, how do you want to spend this day? What she was really asking is, can we do it together? How can I be there with you to support you? And in the past, I always went and sat by the ocean and cried my eyes out by myself, because I was afraid to let her in on some of that, to let her, see me really ugly cry. And this past year would have been Perry's 21st birthday. And I decided to try something new. So we went to a local restaurant and we toasted Perry. And, as going through that process, of course, I started to break down, and she didn't say anything. She wasn't trying to fix it. She did say, we did talk about some of the times where Perry would make me laugh and some of the funny things that he did. And, those things are extremely healing to be able to speak about and let out, especially with somebody who loves you and who wants to be there for you. So to any men that might be listening to this podcast, if there's somebody out there that that you love, that loves you and that you trust, and is trying to express an interest in spending one of these days with you, and you've been hesitant because you don't want to let them fully in, or you don't want them to see you ugly cry, or you don't really know what you're supposed to do, let them in. Try something new. Let them in and spend some time with them. And I bet you'll find it as healing as I did.
One of the myths of grief, because so many of us are taught these lessons in childhood, that, that's it's emulated for us because grief isn't generally talked about as we grow up, is to be strong. And in a podcast, many podcast interviews at this point, it comes up frequently. But just yesterday, I'd even posed the question, like, what does it mean to be strong? What does that even mean? Like, what does that look like? There's no heroism in pretending that you've got it put together and that you're okay. And really, you're lying to yourself. And that probably does more harm than anything that anyone else, can say to you. Those do harm too. I mean, people say hurtful and harmful things all the time because they don't know better. They haven't received the knowledge of how to sit with others in their grief, probably because they haven't sat in their own.
So true.
Yeah. So I think for men specifically, it was actually too, it was military. We were talking the military audience, and that's very much so,
Be tough.
And yeah, be tough. And that's where a lot of men, that they have that upbringing of believing that they need to be tough. Yeah.
I think we've all been basically, I'm 50 years old. So, I know, I feel like it's changing a little bit now. But, I was basically brainwashed to believe that real men don't cry, but we don't talk to each other about our emotions or even go and seek therapy. We're supposed to just tough it out and suck it up. And that is the farthest thing from the truth. That strategy doesn't work with grief, because you're never going to be able to outrun the memories. You're never going to be able to outflank them. So it's only by sitting in your grief and talking with it and talking with people and facing it that you then begin to connect to the memories and the reminders, because they're never going to go away. So I agree with you. And I think it takes a lot more strength to be vulnerable and to share your story and to cry in front of people than it does to not, because I feel like it was a lot easier for me to push people away and just do it all alone. It took me stepping into a discomfort, to talk with people openly and honestly and vulnerably. And I think that more men need to realize that, especially through grief, that you can't deny it. You can't run away from it. And if you want to truly heal, let people in and talk about it, because otherwise it's going to come up in some negative way eventually.
How has this, because, with a family unit, everyone grieves. How has this reshaped your relationships? And is grief more openly talked about within the family now? Has that changed a little bit?
Yeah, but it was me that made that happen. I'm not saying that I take credit. It's that people will avoid it. My parents, my brothers, family, they avoid it. And I even notice it, like, in just day-to-day conversations with those people that know me and know my story. They'll say, if they're talking about their child, they'll kind of change the conversation because they don't want to make me feel bad or something like that. But I'll say, oh no, Perry played baseball too. He was left-handed, he was a pitcher, and he did this and he did that. And I openly bring him up in conversations. It's not something that I want to hide, and I don't want his memory to be forgotten. And it's I look at it as though too, number one, I'm so thankful and feel blessed from the fact that I was even lucky enough to have a child. There's a lot of people out there that trying and can't even have children. So the fact that I had a child and got to spend 14 and a half amazing years with him, I focus on all of the memories and the good times that we did get to share together, because, I do believe that where focus goes, energy flows, right? So just like, if you stand outside in the sun, The sunshine can cover vast amounts of the earth, and you can go outside and you can stand there and feel like you're being wrapped in a warm blanket. Yet, if you take a magnifying glass and you focus it on one specific area, you can start a fire. And I believe that that's true of our thoughts as well. It's what we choose to focus on that where the energy goes. And I focus on all of the good things and the good times that I had, as opposed to the why me and why did this happen to me and why didn't this person do that and all of the negative aspects of it. It's a conscious decision that you have to make. So some people I can tell you even look surprised, like that I'll bring up his name, in conversation. But why? Why? Yes, this thing happened. There's nothing that I can do about that. Like, if there was a way for me to bring him back, I would do it. If there was a way for me to trade places with him in that moment, I would do it. But that's not possible. And I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there's that old Chinese tale about the magical mustard seed. Have you ever heard that?
I haven't, but will you share it?
I will try my best. I don't have it memorized, but it's something like this, where there was a woman who lost her only child, and she went to some sage and said, "What magical potions or incantations did you have to bring my son back?" And he told her that he wanted her to go to find a mustard seed from a home that has never known sorrow. So off she went, and she saw a big mansion. She went, she knocked on the door, and she said, "I need to get a mustard seed from a home that has known no sorrow. Is this such a place?" And they said, "Oh no, you're in the wrong place. This family has known sorrow." And she realized that what she went through, she could possibly help this family. So she stayed with them for a while and helped them. And then off to the next place that she went, and then the next and the next. And she never found that magical mustard seed, but in her or a home that had never known sorrow. But in her travels, she was able to help so many people, she eventually forgot about finding that magical mustard seed. And I feel like I'm on a very similar path, that I'm finding that I'm put in positions where people have been through something, mostly the loss of a loved one. And through conversations and through walking them through specific, diving into certain areas, that I'm
Oh, you had froze.
Oh,
So I'll have to edit this out, but just go back to where what was the last thing you said? I'm in this phase now, I think is what you said.
yeah, I feel like that I'm on a very similar path as that woman who was looking for that magical mustard seed, that God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, has me on this path and has given me the strength to be able to have these conversations and to help other people navigate their own grief. And to me, there is nothing more rewarding than helping somebody through that process. I'm not saying that, everybody I talk to, I can get them to the point where they're happy or something like that. And the fact is, I say this to several people, I don't have a master's degree in psychology, but I have a PhD in experience, and the heart to serve other people. And through that, through my experience, I feel like I've been gifted an ability to be able to do that.
That's wonderful. What is one tip that you would give? I mean, you gave a lot of tips, but is there one tip that you would give someone who's a parent, specifically, who's lost a child today, listening?
Most of the people that, most of the parents that I've spoken to who have lost a child hold on to very similar things that I was holding on to, which was the guilt and the shame and all the things that they could have done. I think that for me, everything changed when I gave myself permission to heal. That may be a month, that may be 6 years. I think it's going to be different for different people. Um, and I believe that their child would likely want them to get up too, right? They wouldn't want them to live in a life of misery and despair. But at some point, you have to give yourself permission to heal. And whether it's as simple as something as using post-it notes or writing something in places where you can see them, allowing yourself to give yourself permission, at some point, you have to make that decision that you want to pursue healing, because without that, nothing is going to work.
I had a guest recently say, you can be a griever and you still can go to Disneyland.
Love that. I love that, because I'm always going to be a griever. We're always going. It's not like I can't say, oh, I've gotten through it or I've overcome it. It's how you integrate grief into your life, I believe, because it's not something that if you look at it as something you're going to have to overcome or break through, you might be setting yourself up for failure, because you're always going to find those memories, and those reminders. They're going to come up, and when they do, take the time to feel them. Don't run away from them. That would probably be the other thing. That would probably be even a bigger thing, is to don't avoid the pain. Don't push it down. Don't run away from it. There was times, I have pictures of my son all over the house, of pictures of me and him, and pictures of just him. Not like all over, like where it's everywhere, but in several rooms in the house, because I want to see him. I want to see his face, and it's not something where I look at it and it makes me want to break down. But that's, I think it's also my perception of it, the way that I choose to look at it. But to at some point you have to take the time to kind of sit in the pain of what happened and recognize what happened, because that's where, for me anyway, the true healing came from.
In the first early months or weeks, did you want to, when you realized he's not coming home, like he's gone, did you want to pack everything up and do away with it? Like what, or because sometimes parents will keep everything just as it was. And then there might be parents that just want to pack everything up and have it gone. What was that for you?
No, yeah, no, I didn't pack everything up and want it gone. That because for me, that would be like almost like, I don't know. I don't want to say it's wrong. I don't think there's a wrong way or a right way to do this, really. I think people have to do what's gonna work for them. But I would never want, I want his memory around. I want the little things, whether it be his baseball glove or a necklace that he made for me when he was 8 years old. Like I like having those things around, because they are reminders of his love, and that he was here. So I never felt the need to pack it up and put it away so that I can kind of box up the pain and move it out of my life. Yes, there was a point where, okay, I got to clean up his room or take certain things out and move them away. But it wasn't because of an effort to try to get away from it. It was more of just like, this is the right time for me to do that. And for some people, if that's a month, if that's what they feel that they have to do, as long as it's not coming from a place of avoidance, that's the biggest piece. I think the point that I want to make is that if you're trying to box up the things or hide the things away so that you can not see them because they make it too painful for you, I think you're kind of missing the point. It's going through that pain that where the healing eventually comes from.
I had a thought. I'm gonna have to edit this out. What's it? This is why I should write stuff down. I had a piggyback thought to what you shared too, and that escaped my brain as well. But I want to ask this because there might be people listening who lost somebody that, like you, don't have a gravesite to go to, particularly where they know that their loved one is, right? Um, I believe for me, that would add another layer of grief. Um, that's why I'd asked you if you had ever been back to Juniper.
Jupiter,
What would,
yeah.
yeah, what would you, right? Juniper?
Jupiter.
Oh, Juniper. What did I say? Juniper?
uh,
Juniper. Okay, well, that's an essential oil.
all good.
Jupiter. Okay, let me rewind.
Okay.
What would you say to parents who, like you, don't have like a cemetery or a grave site to go to where they know that that's where their loved one is at? Because I imagine for me that would be another layer of grief to experience and go through and have to address. And that's why I'd asked you if you had gone to back to Jupiter. What would you say to those parents, and how did you kind of work through that yourself?
That's a great question. That really is a great question. That's something that I struggled with for a while. But in my heart, whether it's a graveyard or a monument, whatever it might be, they're not there. I mean, yes, their body or their remains may be in the ground, but their spirit is not there. You know, that's just the container. And I get why it may be important to like I always went to the ocean. You know, that was where, you know, and I still do. I still do. I go sit, you know, on the coast because I feel like that was the last place that he was seen. But I feel like it's more about um, even on a daily basis. You know, I talk to Perry. I don't feel like I need to go to a specific place. But if somebody's struggling with that, you know, there you don't necessarily have to build a statue. Like I said, the parents of the other child went and they put this statue there so that they can have some place to go to. For me, you know, I'm in the process of writing a book. I did my TEDx talk, and there's other things that you can do with your pain, you know, or what you've been through, or the lessons that you've learned from what you've been through that might serve you just as well. But, you know, I don't know that I have the best answer for that. You know, I wish there was saying, I wish I could say, well, you could do this, this, or this. For me, you know, it was, you know, getting up on stage, you know, at a TEDx event and sharing my story in an effort to help other people heal, that I felt was kind of like a way for me to give back. And the book that I'm writing, the same thing, kind of a way to, you know, to give back. Or, you know, you can do something like what the other parents did. You can build something or put a monument or do something that you feel would help you heal. But even if there was an actual physical place for me to go, I likely would go. But I know that he's not there. You know, so for me, um, um, it's more. I feel like the conversations and the way that I honor and respect him is by sharing his story and sharing his memory, and also now what I'm doing and trying to help other people.
I think it circles back to what you've said about integrating your grief and integrating the experience into your life and how it's shaped your life now. And um, you alluded to it earlier about your faith. I think that's greatly influences how people respond to their grief, in feeling like they have a spiritual connection in some way to their departed loved one. And, you know, I think that, yeah, there's a lot of influences there, I think. But I was just curious how you in particular, and what you would say to people if they had that question for you, if they're a grieving parent too. Because I think if I'm wondering, I'm sure someone listening is wondering. And so that's why I like to ask. And
That's why I feel like my TEDx or my book that's coming out will be sort of my monument. It's not a place that I need to, a place that I need to visit. But that's sort of the way I look at it, is trying to kind of giving back in a way. Yeah.
are you finding your book writing therapeutic for you?
Very, yeah, very, very therapeutic. And I mean, but ultimately everything that I do, like, is really just to help other people. Really, that's my biggest goal, is that I just want to give people, either an idea or a story or something to think about, to let them know that they don't have to live a life of despair, whether it's the loss of a child or loss of a loved one. And like you said earlier, or there might be a job or a dream, we should all take that time to grieve and to feel that process. But eventually, at some point, we have to choose, do you want to live there or not?
So tell us about your book. When's it coming out, and where people can find you?
I'm still in the editing phase. I would like to see it to come out in the next couple of months. Don't have a specific date, but I would say sometime maybe over the next 90 to 120 days. People can visit my website. That's philcohen.com, PHILCOHEN.com. And I have a place there where you can book a call with me. I don't charge. I'm not charging you to have a conversation. But I'd love to learn more about what you've been through and maybe any way that I might be able to help you. And if there is, that's really my main goal through all this, is to see if there's some way that I can help people heal. Please reach out, and I would be honored to be able to help.
Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I think you did a pretty good job of asking me all the questions around, grief and healing. And I can't really think of anything else.
Like a final closing, anything? That's okay.
Yeah.
Feel complete. If you feel complete, then we're good.
Yeah. No. Well, no, I think I feel pretty complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I will put all of the links that you mentioned in the show notes. Where can people find you on social media? Where's your favorite place to be there?
Either on Facebook or LinkedIn are the two places that I'm active right now.
Okay, I will put those in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your story and for being here.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And remember, when you unleash your heart, you unleash your life. Much love.